Hello, and thank you for joining us. The Supreme Court heard arguments Thursday in a case that could limit the power of judges to block the Trump administration's policies nationwide. The case before the justices stems from the president's day one executive order to end birthright citizenship, a constitutional provision granting U.S. citizenship to anyone born on U.S. soil. Shortly after the president signed that order, a group of state attorneys general filed a lawsuit opposing it, and a federal judge issued what's known as a nationwide injunction. The injunction blocks the order from being enforced while the case plays out in court. But the Trump administration argues a single federal judge should not have the power to block its policies nationwide. During oral arguments, the justices appeared split on the practicality of nationwide injunctions and the implications if they were to go away.
The practical problem is that there are 680 district court judges, and they are dedicated and they are scholarly, and I'm not impugning their motives in any way, but sometimes they're wrong.
You would respect the opinions and the judgments of the Supreme Court, and you're saying you would respect the judgment, but not necessarily the opinion of a lower court.
You're going to have, individual by individual by individual, and all of those individuals are going to win, and the ones who can't afford to go to court, they're the ones who are going to lose.
While judicial authority is being debated in Washington, President Trump is in Abu Dhabi for the final leg of his Middle East trip, which is so far heavily focused on economic deals and foreign investment in the United States. We're also tracking new economic data. Wholesale inflation came in better than expected last month, but it comes at the same time that Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is raising concerns about price volatility and potential inventory shortfalls. We're going to take a deep dive on all these stories, but first let's turn to Chief Legal Correspondent Jan Crawford, who's outside the Supreme Court on the issue before justices Thursday. Jan?
It was about 2.5 hours of arguments, and I think there are a majority of the justices who would like to end nationwide injunctions. The question is, how are they going to do that? They really struggled with trying to come up with some kind of rule or what the opinion would look like, because in a case like this, what would the implications be? The justices on the other side, the liberal justices, really suggested that this was actually the kind of case where you should have a nationwide rule, because you can't have different states having different rules on citizenship. This is the case where you would need some kind of uniform policy. But other justices suggested that the courts could handle that. There are ways to get around that, perhaps class actions. So I think this is going to be a really difficult opinion for them to write. There was not a clear consensus on what approach they could take, and there wasn't even a clear consensus on whether or not eventually they're going to have to consider the merits. Remember, this is not about the underlying merits of President Trump's order on birthright citizenship and whether that would be unconstitutional. Every federal court judge that's considered it said it is, and some have said it's blatantly unconstitutional. But the question is, in this case, are they going to have to decide that? So far, it's not on the table. They're not planning to take up the merits here, but there was some discussion today. They may have to down the road. Back to you.
Jan Crawford, thank you. For more, let's bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson. She's a professor at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. So, Jessica, conservative justices Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, both appointed by President Trump during his first term, really pushed back against the Trump administration's arguments. What did they say?
So I think, as you heard, a number of the conservative justices, as Jan was just talking about, pushed back a little bit on these questions. So I think what we have is a division between the conservative justices who are more comfortable saying we need to limit the power of federal judges to issue these nationwide injunctions, these universal injunctions. And then the more liberal justices being comfortable with them having that power, in part because they're trying to avoid a patchwork of different laws where maybe an executive order is in place in one part of the country and not in place in another part of the country. As Jan laid out, I think the big question here is, how do they write this opinion? Is there a majority to say that no nationwide injunctions, period, full stop? Or will they try and find maybe some middle ground compromise where only nationwide injunctions in rare or extraordinary circumstances? How do they write the standard for what is a rare or extraordinary circumstance? Or do they do something else, like say, you know what? We do think we need to look at the merits of this. We need to look at whether or not this executive order that appears to strip birthright citizenship, do we need to actually analyze this before we make a decision? And then they would ask for supplemental briefing, and that could come pretty quickly.
So This isn't just about one administration and one case, even though it is the birthright citizenship executive order that led to this. What are the bigger implications of what they're deciding here?
That's such an important question. It is about the power of federal judges. When somebody walks into court, can they, if they believe that that person or group or state should win, can they say, we agree that you should win, and this particular executive order should not be applied anywhere in the country? Or do they only have the power to say, you win, and therefore this executive order will not be applied to you? Now, this obviously has to deal with more than just birthright citizenship. It has to do with, I mean, we can think back to the Biden administration and student loans. We can think back to the Obama administration and DACA and DAPA. It has to do with other executive orders where federal judges took a look and thought, this really shouldn't be implemented anywhere in the country. So big implications for this administration and frankly, every other administration.
So that said, can we eventually expect the justices to rule on the merits of ending birthright citizenship?
Yes, I think eventually they are going to have to rule on the merits. And the question, as we were just talking about, is how soon, essentially? Will they ask for additional or supplemental briefing, maybe tomorrow even, and say, I think we really need to take a look at this now? Or will they rule just on this issue of nationwide or universal injunctions? And then later, will they take up the substance of this question? I think it's unavoidable that they're going to look at it. I just don't know when that will be.
Jessica Levinson, thank you.